Hello, everyone. Elliot here from ESBR Boxing, joined by my esteemed colleague Danny, and we're here to well, I suppose some exciting news, depending on which side of the fence you're sitting on. Is that the Tommy Fury Jake Paul fight, or should it be Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury? I don't know who's the A side here. Has been confirmed. Venue still being decided. Date rumored to be February the 25th. Now, as you can tell by looking at us, Danny and I are two men from different generations. Danny is very much the man that knows about these sort of things, very much the man with his finger on the pulse when it comes to youth culture. And I'm very much here really just to, I suppose, make sure he behaves himself. So Danny, first and foremost, can I gather your thoughts on this? Are you excited by this fight? I'm not going to ask for a prediction yet, that will come. First and foremost, your reaction to this fight being announced.
Buzzing, mate. Who says we don't get the big fights? Nah, I think you've sort of oversold me with my knowledge of this. I suppose it's sort of one that's, they've tried to make it twice for one reason or another. Fury's pulled out on both occasions. I think it would be good just to sort of put to bed the idea that Fury's ducking Jake Paul, which has gained a lot of traction on social media, which isn't really a good look for the whole fighting family Fury thing, sort of running in fear of a YouTuber. I suppose, as you said, it's not the highest level fight, but it could potentially be one of the biggest fights in terms of numbers this year, which is, I don't know how to feel about that really, but no, I mean, it'll be a spectacle. You can only imagine what the build-up's going to be like, especially if Big John's involved. So I'm just looking forward to the whole circus around it, maybe slightly more than the in-ring action, I think.
I'll give people, just a little bit of summary here. So obviously, as you mentioned, both guys aren't in any way established, I suppose, in the kind of elite levels of boxing. But Tommy Fury's got an 8-0 record, 23 years old. I suppose last time out he fought a guy called Daniel Boxiani, who actually had a winning record. But other than that, there's been some fighters with a record, 2-26, 0-11. Jake Paul, 6-0, 6-0 record, I suppose, 4 KOs, 26 years old, so slightly older. But he's obviously got victories over, I suppose, converted MMA fighters. He's got victories over kind of Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley, Ben Askren. So Danny, what I'm gonna ask you is really, I suppose, some people have said that Tommy Fury wouldn't look out of place on a Misfits card. Do you feel that this is the standard of that, or do you feel that with Jake Paul's improvement and Tommy Fury, I suppose, having a kind of boxing background to a degree, that this will actually resemble the closest to a sort of boxing contest that we've seen Jake Paul in so far?
It's closer to the standard of a Misfit event than it is any other headline event you'll see in boxing through the year, without a doubt. Like, they're both competent fighters at this stage. I mean, they've been training, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it is. But for my money, neither of them are anywhere near elite. I'm not sure what weight class this is going to be at. They both are somewhere in between cruiser and light heavyweight. And it's almost a bit of a godsend, I think, for Tommy Fury that the whole Jake Paul / influencer thing has taken off in the way it has, because I really don't know what they would do with him if it wasn't for that. I know he's young, but he's not. He's got the Fury name, which I think leads people to believe that he's been having bare knuckle fights since he was 3 in his backyard, which I don't think is the case. I think he's got into it relatively late. I don't think he was doing it that long before he was in Love Island, to be honest. So I think it's maybe a stroke of luck this whole scene sort of emerged. And if I was him, I would be throwing my name, attaching it to KSI and Jake Paul. Like, what, you're making so much more money for such easier fights. Or the other hand, start calling out Dan Aziz for 100 grand, you get your head caved in. So I don't begrudge him going down the route, but in terms of the level, I mean, it would probably be like a decent Misfits headliner. Like, I don't actually think KSI is that far off these boys, which is more a comment on when they're at than where he's at. So it is what it is.
Thank you, Thank you very much for that, Danny. I think you're actually right in the sense, I suppose, with Fury. I mean, obviously, there's that perception that he was sort of throwing and chewing right-handers from the age of 3 onwards. But there's that sense, I suppose, his profile with Love Island just took off, didn't it? Essentially, and you obviously got in a similar way to Campbell Hatton, I suppose, struggling with the fact that you're kind of doing what a lot of boxers do, away from the limelight at sort of 6 p.m. before anyone's sitting in the crowd, and now you've actually got hundreds, thousands of people watching you essentially fight people that no one's heard of, that aren't exactly the best. But I was going to say, so it's not, which is not necessarily his fault. But I was going to say, who do you? I mean, again, I'm not unable to pronounce half the people on his record. But I'm saying, given that I suppose that Fury has kind of tried to build in an established boxing way to a degree, whereas Jake Paul has essentially taken people that aren't known boxers, fighters nonetheless, but like, MMA guys. Whose CV or whose preparation for this fight do you think has actually been better, or is it equal in that sense?
No, Jake Paul's. I think Tyrone. Take Ben Askren aside, which is his first professional contest. I think Tyrone Woodley would beat maybe everyone in Fury's resume. I think there's like that Scottish fella, Jordan Grant, who had like a winning record. That was a really scrappy fight. Fury just edged that. Maybe apart from him, Woodley would beat everyone. Anderson Silva beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. a year or 2 years before Jake Paul beat him, and that's a former world champion. That's a lot better than a lot of people are fighting in their 70th fight. You could say obviously Silva very old, but he was old when he beat Chavez Jr. And like, I know Chavez Jr., it's not like Canelo, but it's still, I was a bona fide world champion in boxing. So people criticize Jake Paul for fighting over the hill MMA fighters, so to say, but I think the vast majority of those would beat the sort of dross that most professional boxers face in the first 5-6 fights. Like, people, again, there's conspiracy theories almost over how much ambition Jake Paul's opponents have come in with, and that's maybe a conversation for another day. But on paper, I think Jake Paul's. I think the vast majority of people he's beat would beat the vast majority of people that Tommy Fury's beat.
No, I think I actually fully agree with you. And it's going to lead in segue into the next question, which I want to ask you, which is, as you highlighted it there in the first answer that you gave earlier around the perception of being online that the Tommy Fury has ducked Jake Paul. We can talk what we want about I suppose his entrance is I suppose lack of entrance, sorry, into the US, but I think pressure wise, it's probably fair to say that there's significantly more pressure coming from the boxing community on Tommy Fury here. And I was just wondering, for you, should he lose this fight against Jake Paul, do you see there being any way that he can sort of repair his image or rehabilitate his image, or is this simply a must win for Tommy Fury?
It really is a must win. I say this completely seriously. I would worry for Tommy Fury if he loses this. He'll not be able to show his face walking down the streets of the UK. Like, he would become a figure of national ridicule if he lost to Jake Paul, which is why, in a way, like, I don't begrudge him being massively keen for the fight, because even if you're like 99% sure I'll beat this fella, you've got your own dad saying he'll disown you, lose, and then you'll become like a walking joke down the street. So he definitely can't afford to lose the fight. Like, no way. Like, can you imagine it? Like, I can't, like, I know maybe Big John's just saying this stuff for the camera, but I sort of doubt it. I don't think he would have too much hesitation and cutting ties with Tommy if Jake Paul beat him. So there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on Fury to go in there and do a job on Jake Paul, because it's something he's always said he would do. He said he's been insulted in the past at, being compared to the level of a YouTuber. So there's big pressure, and a sort of unique type of pressure, going into the fight. But the sort of the payday would trump that for me if I was in his position. But no, a lot on his shoulders going into it.
And you can start readying yourself for this, because this is the question prior to the question when I'm going to ask you for a prediction. But what I'm going to say here is, obviously you mentioned pressure. There'll be a lot of eyes on this. Is this, in your opinion, and I suppose taking the wider boxing landscape into consideration, is this the biggest fight that can be made between, I suppose, sort of, well, if you count Tommy Fury as a crossover fighter between someone who's essentially a boxer, and Jake Paul is sort of crossing over into that world, like the biggest kind of social media misfits kind of matchup that can be made? And also, I mean, where do you expect this size wise to even rank against, I suppose, some of the fights that we're talking about in boxing? So if you think, the kind of Spence, Crawford's, obviously the Fury, Usyk, how do you think this will actually do in comparison to those as well?
I think in terms of the biggest crossover matchup, I still think that Jake Paul KSI fight is an absolute monster. I think like, and I'm a hardcore boxing fan, 100%. I don't really pay that much attention to um these influencer cards, but being from my generation, you sort of get a gauge of how big the fight would be, and I genuinely believe it's the biggest fight in terms of numbers that can be made in boxing, and it's not something I'm happy to be saying. I think it's a sad sort of state of affairs for, but I think this would do more numbers worldwide than Fury. It's like 100% KSI. All that is, like there's not a teenager on the planet who wouldn't be watching that. Like, get it twisted. These are like modern day like superstars. I think this is still a big fight. Jake Paul, Tommy Fury. The only thing I think that sort of stops it being like reaching that sort of level is Fury's not a massive name in America. He's only sort of a name now that he's attached himself to Jake Paul. Obviously, being Tyson Fury's brother helps that slightly, and he's a name as it goes over here, but he's not reaching the name of like a KSI or whatever. But I still think we'll probably do maybe 400,000, 400,000 in the States, and similar enough number over here. So it would do really well in terms of where I would rank it, like against other sort of traditional boxing matchups. It would do a lot more than a lot of them. It would do more than Spence Crawford worldwide, which is a painful statement to say. But no, it'll do well. It'll do big numbers on both sides of the pond.
I think you mentioned that being a painful statement, but to be honest with you, I found it more painful when you were talking about being a teenager again, and that's just an age that I can no longer identify with. But we're going to go obviously keep this short and sweet. Obviously as a kind of a reaction video mainly, but I'm actually going to come to you, Danny, now and say obviously you say you are a hardcore boxing fan. That is true. You do watch a lot of boxing. You've seen Jake Paul fight. You've seen Tyson Fury. Obviously you've seen Tyson Fury, but you've seen Tommy Fury fight as well. And I want to get your initial thoughts on who you see actually prevailing in this fight. Obviously, we've got a lot of time to talk about training camps and there's excuses, I suppose, that could be made and various things, and the hype will be great. But I just want your initial thoughts today, as it's been announced. Who do you think is going to prevail?
I think Tommy Fury should beat him realistically. Like the sort of two best names in Jake Paul's resume are Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva, and they were both. I know we fought Woodley twice, but they were strange fights because there were moments in each of them that both Woodley and Silva looked levels above Jake Paul, and then would just sort of take their foot off the gas. And there's been rumors, like pretty strong rumors, that there's been like no knockout clauses in a lot of Jake Paul contracts. And I don't think Fury would go in there to that. And I think overall he has been boxing a bit more. I don't know necessarily if he takes it as seriously as Jake Paul does, but just going by the eye test, he seems to be more athletic. He looks a bit quicker. He looks a bit stronger. Punching power, it's hard to say, but I would fancy Fury to get the job done, I think.
And like I said, it'd be a brave man, Danny, actually, with the amount of boxing you watch, to disagree with you. And I'm not going to disagree with you. What I'm going to say is that I hope Jake Paul wins. I don't necessarily think he will. I don't know if he will, but I just think the meltdown that you see from the boxing community, the online social media community, it'd just be worth it for me, frankly, for that alone. But we'll see, obviously, how things develop. Obviously, how things go. Like you mentioned there as well. Obviously, the build up should be electric. I think John Fury came out with that amusing dog-based quote last time out, which still makes me chuckle. He's a man that is often given to letting his mouth run away with him, and frankly, to the betterment of the hype of this fight. Jake Paul as well, good at promoting himself and everything as well. So I think it should be a great fight. At least if not a great fight, it'd be some great build up. So we look forward to I suppose breaking it down nearer the time. But Danny, is there anything I'd like to leave with you here by the last comment? Would you like to say anything further about the fight? Anything further to those watching?
Nope, just we do cover real boxing here, folks. But I really enjoyed that, mate. Looking forward to definitely the build up, as you say. But it was good stuff.
Brilliant, guys. Well, yeah, thank you for watching ESBR Boxing. Check us out, like Danny says, for real. I say real. This is as real in some ways as anything else. But check us out for some I suppose traditional boxing content. And look forward to also further breakdowns of this kind of fight. Thank you.